I'm Lisa, 32 female. I live in a quiet suburban town with my husband, David, and our beautiful 3-year-old daughter, Chloe. For the past 5 years, I've worked as a marketing manager for a mid-sized tech company, a job I genuinely enjoy because it allows me to be creative while still providing the stability our family needs. Our life is, for the most part, exactly what I always dreamed it would be: peaceful, filled with love, and centered around the little world we've built for our daughter. But as Chloe's third birthday approached, I was about to be reminded that the family you're born into doesn't always value that peace. The text message I sent was simple enough, an open-hearted invitation, but the replies I received would set in motion a series of events that would change my family dynamic forever. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The planning for Chloe's third birthday party had been my little project for weeks. At 3, she was finally old enough to understand what a birthday was, to feel the excitement of having a day that was all about her. Her face would light up whenever she saw a princess-themed decoration in a store, and she'd talk endlessly about the big cake she was going to have. David and I wanted to make it special, not extravagant, but filled with the warmth and love of family. It was a Saturday, planned 2 weeks in advance, and I'd meticulously coordinated everything to be as easy as possible for everyone. We were hosting it in our backyard, which was just big enough for a small bouncy castle and a picnic blanket for the little ones. I had planned simple games, ordered a custom-made princess castle cake from a local baker, and spent hours crafting handmade decorations. More than anything, I wanted Chloe to be surrounded by the people who were supposed to love her most. My side of the family consisted of my mother, Sandra, and my younger sister, Megan. We lived in the same city, no more than a 30-minute drive from each other. Growing up, our family dynamic was complicated. My mom had always been a very practical, no-nonsense woman who worked as an administrator at a local college. She wasn't unkind, but she was rarely affectionate. Praise was a currency she distributed sparingly, and it often felt like I was working tirelessly to earn it, only to fall short. Megan, on the other hand, seemed to navigate our mother's world with an ease I never could. She was prettier, more outgoing, and had a flair for the dramatic that our mother, for some reason, found endlessly entertaining. Now, Megan was a lifestyle blogger, a career path my mother championed with a pride she rarely showed for my steady, corporate job. Megan's life was a curated feed of brunch spots, boutique shopping trips, and weekend getaways, all documented for her modest but growing number of followers. I knew they were busy. My mom, even in retirement, had a packed social calendar filled with book club meetings and lunches with her former colleagues. Megan's schedule was dictated by social events and collaborations that were, in her words, critical for her brand. Still, this was my daughter's birthday, my only child, their only granddaughter and niece. It felt important. So, on a Tuesday morning, 11 days before the party, I opened up my phone and created a group chat with my mom and Megan. I kept the message light and cheerful. "Hey both," I typed. "Just a reminder about Chloe's third birthday party on Saturday the 18th at our place. It's from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. She'd absolutely love to have her family there to celebrate with her. Let me know if you can make it. Read." I hit send and put my phone down, a hopeful smile on my face. I imagined Chloe's delight at seeing her Grandma Sandra and Aunt Megan walk through the back gate. In my mind, it was a sunny afternoon, filled with laughter and the happy shrieks of toddlers. The reality, however, crashed down on me less than 5 minutes later. The first reply was from my mom. No greeting, no pleasantries, just a blunt, dismissive sentence. "We're busy, don't expect us." My heart sank, not even a sorry or an excuse, just busy. Before I could even process the sting of her words, a second message popped up from Megan. "She's too young to care anyway, Lisa. It's not like she'll remember it." I stared at the screen, the words blurring together. It was a 1-2 punch of casual cruelty that knocked the wind out of me. Megan's message was somehow worse than my mother's. It wasn't just a rejection of the invitation. It was a complete invalidation of my daughter's feelings, of my efforts, and of the significance of the day. To them, this milestone was a non-event, something Chloe was too young to appreciate, and therefore not worth their time. The cheerful balloon and cake emojis Dee considered adding to my message now seemed pathetic. My hands felt cold as I typed out a response. I deleted 3 different drafts, one angry, one pleading, one dripping with sarcasm. In the end, I settled on 2 words that conveyed a level of detached acceptance I was far from feeling. All right. I closed the chat, my chest tight with a familiar ache. This wasn't the first time I'd been brushed aside, but doing it to my daughter felt like a fresh wound. David found me a few minutes later, standing motionless in the kitchen, staring out the window. He wrapped his arms around me from behind and kissed my temple. "Everything okay?" he asked softly. I couldn't bring myself to say the words out loud, so I just handed him my phone. He read the messages, his jaw tightening with each word. He let out a slow, frustrated breath. "I'm sorry, honey," he said, his voice laced with anger on my behalf. "They're unbelievable." "She said Chloe won't remember it," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "Like her feelings don't matter because she's only 3. "Her feelings matter to us," David said firmly, turning me around to face him. "And the memories matter to us. We're her parents. We'll remember, and we'll make sure she has the best day with or without them." His words were a comfort, but the hurt lingered. It wasn't just about them missing a party. It was about the message they were sending to me, and by extension, to Chloe. You are not a priority. Your celebrations are an inconvenience. Your joy is secondary to whatever else we have going on. That afternoon, the carefully crafted decorations I'd laid out on the dining room table seemed to mock me. The pastel-colored streamers and glittery, "Happy 3rd birthday" banner suddenly felt like symbols of a foolish hope, a naive belief that this time, for Chloe's sake, they would choose to show up. The coldness of their replies echoed in my mind, a stark reminder of where I stood in their lives. And as I looked at the little princess-themed paper plates, I made a quiet decision. They might think this day was insignificant, but I was going to make sure it was a day they would regret missing. The "all right" I had sent back was a shield. It was the emotional equivalent of a brick wall, built from years of practice. Growing up, showing my disappointment to my mother or sister was a tactical error. It was either met with accusations of being overly sensitive or, worse, completely ignored. My feelings were an inconvenience to them, a messy complication in their neatly ordered lives. So I learned to swallow the hurt, to present a calm, unaffected exterior while the storm raged inside. This time was no different. I projected an air of nonchalance, but the weight of their texts sat on my chest like a physical object. It wasn't just the rejection, it was the history behind it, a long and painful pattern of being made to feel small. I was the responsible one, the old soul. While Megan was signing up for dance classes and theater camps, I was at home, helping with chores and making sure my homework was done without being asked. My mother praised my independence, but it felt less like a compliment and more like an expectation. I was the child she didn't have to worry about, which also meant I was the child she didn't pay much attention to. My achievements were met with a quiet nod, while Megan's were celebrated with gusto. When I got a scholarship to a state university, my mother's reaction was, "Well, that's practical. It'll save us money." When Megan won a regional dance competition, my mother threw a surprise party for her and her friends. This dynamic bled into our adult lives. My stable career in marketing was boring and safe. Megan's fluctuating life as a blogger was brave and exciting. When David and I bought our first house, my mother's only comment was about the long-term maintenance costs of the garden. When Megan moved into a trendy, overpriced downtown apartment, my mother spent a weekend helping her decorate, later posting photos on social media with the caption, "So proud of my girl, making her dreams come true." It was as if my life, built on responsibility and careful planning, was a quiet, monochrome film, while Megan's was a vibrant, technicolor production that my mother couldn't get enough of. The texts about Chloe's party were just the latest entry in a long ledger of slights. I tried to push it aside, to focus on the joy of the upcoming celebration for my daughter, but the dismissive tone of their words kept replaying in my mind. "We're busy." No explanation, no apology. It was a statement of fact, a declaration that their time was more valuable than ours. And Megan's comment, "she's too young to care anyway," was a deeper cut. It wasn't just about Chloe being 3, it was a reflection of how they saw me as a mother. It implied that this party was for me, not my daughter, that I was projecting my own needs onto my child. It was a clause. Sick move, a way to belittle my efforts, and dismiss the genuine love I was pouring into this day for Chloe. A couple of days later, my resolve to remain unaffected began to crumble. I was scrolling through social media, a mindless habit to numb the lingering sting, when I saw a post from Megan. It was a picture of her and my mother, clinking champagne glasses at a fancy rooftop bar. The sun was setting behind them, casting a golden glow on their smiling faces. The caption read, "Mom-daughter planning session for the big event. Sparkles can't wait to celebrate the happy couple. Wedding bells hash made of honor duties, family first." My blood ran cold. The post was from Tuesday afternoon, just hours after they had told me they were too busy to come to their granddaughter's birthday party. The big event was my cousin's wedding. My cousin, Sarah, was my mother's niece, the daughter of her sister. The wedding was indeed on the same Saturday as Chloe's party. I had known about the wedding for months, of course. Sarah had sent out save-the-dates a year in advance. When I had received it, I had felt a pang of disappointment, knowing my mom and sister would have to choose. But I had held out a sliver of hope. Maybe they would come to Chloe's party for an hour before heading to the wedding ceremony, which I knew didn't start until 5 p.m. Our party was from 1 to 4 p.m. It was entirely possible to do both. But their texts made it clear they had no intention of even trying. And Megan's post, with its cheerful family-first hashtag, felt like a deliberate slap in the face. We were family, too. Wasn't Chloe's 3rd birthday a significant family event? Apparently not. A wedding, a more glamorous and socially significant occasion, had completely eclipsed my daughter's milestone. It wasn't just that they were busy, it was what they were busy with. They had chosen a party over a party, a celebration over a celebration. They had chosen Sarah over Chloe, over me. I showed the post to David that evening. He stared at it for a long moment, his expression hardening. "So that's what they're busy with," he said, his voice flat. "And Megan is the maid of honor." I nodded, feeling a fresh wave of hurt. Mom is probably helping her with all the planning. It's a whole production. "And they couldn't spare 1 hour?" David said, shaking his head in disbelief. 1 hour to see their granddaughter on her birthday? It's not about the wedding, Lisa. It's about priorities. It's about respect. He was right. It was a clear, unambiguous statement about our place in the family hierarchy. We were at the bottom, an afterthought. The weight of their texts suddenly felt heavier, charged with the full context of their choice. They hadn't just declined an invitation, they had actively chosen another event, a more important family, over us. The casual dismissal was, in fact, a carefully considered decision. My quiet all right had been a mistake. It had let them off the hook too easily. It had allowed them to believe that their rejection had no consequences, that I would simply absorb the disappointment as I always had. But as I looked at the photo of them smiling, so happy and carefree, a different feeling began to smolder beneath the hurt: anger. And with that anger came a dawning realization. This time, I wasn't just going to be all right. This time, I was going to be better. The anger I felt was a slow burn. It wasn't explosive or loud. It was a quiet, simmering heat that began to melt away the years of ingrained disappointment. For my entire life, I had been seeking their approval, hoping for a crumb of the affection and attention they so lavishly showered on each other and on Megan's side of the family. I had adjusted my expectations, made excuses for their behavior, and accepted my role as the secondary, less interesting daughter. But they had brought my child into it. They had dismissed Chloe's importance, and in doing so, they had crossed a line I didn't even know existed. The shield of all right was down, replaced by a steely resolve. David saw the shift in me. He saw the hurt give way to something more focused, more determined. "What are you thinking?" he asked me one evening as I was quietly sketching out a new plan for Chloe's party. "I'm thinking they made their choice," I said, not looking up from my notebook. "They chose the event they thought was more important. They chose the family they wanted to prioritize. So, I'm going to do the same." The original plan for the party had been a simple, family-centric affair. The guest list was small: my mom and sister, David's parents, and a few of our friends with young children. But with my mom and sister out of the picture, a void had been created. And I knew exactly how I wanted to fill it. I wanted to surround my daughter not with obligatory family, but with chosen family. The people who genuinely loved and cherished her, the people who would never consider her a low priority. My first and most important call was to David's parents, Eleanor and Richard. They were the grandparents every child deserved: warm, endlessly patient, and utterly devoted to Chloe. They lived about an hour away, but not once had they ever missed a single milestone in her life. When I told Eleanor that my mother and sister weren't coming, her voice was filled with a gentle sadness for me. "Oh, Lisa, I'm so sorry to hear that," she said. "Their loss, my dear. We wouldn't miss it for the world. We'll be there with bells on." Hearing her unwavering enthusiasm was a balm to my wounded spirit. But I had another idea, a bigger one. David's extended family was large, boisterous, and incredibly close-knit. His aunts, uncles, and cousins often got together for holidays and summer barbecues, and they had always welcomed me with open arms. They all adored Chloe. They lived further away, scattered across the state, and I hadn't initially invited them to the party to avoid making them feel obligated to travel for a toddler's birthday. But now, I saw an opportunity. That night, David and I made a list. We listed his 2 aunts and uncles, their 6 grown children, and their respective partners and young kids. It was a group of nearly 30 people. It was audacious, and the logistics would be a challenge, but the idea felt right. It felt powerful. "Are you sure about this?" David asked, looking at the long list. "It's a lot to ask of them on short notice." "I'm not going to ask," I replied. "I'm going to invite. I'm going to tell them what happened, and I'm going to let them decide. But I have a feeling they'll show up." The next morning, I crafted a new invitation. This one wasn't a casual text message. I designed a beautiful digital invitation with a recent photo of Chloe, smiling so brightly her eyes crinkled. The text was heartfelt and honest. "Dearest family," it began. "As you know, our sweet Chloe is turning 3. We are throwing a party to celebrate this special milestone in her life. We had originally planned a very small gathering, but circumstances have changed. It has become incredibly important to us that Chloe is surrounded by people who truly, deeply love and cherish her on her birthday. We would be absolutely honored if you would join us in making this a day filled with overwhelming love and joy for her. Your presence would be the greatest gift of all." I didn't mention my mother or sister by name. I didn't need to. The message was clear. We were building a fortress of love around our daughter, and we were inviting them to be a part of it. I sent the invitation to a new group chat, this one filled with David's side of the family. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within an hour, my phone was buzzing incessantly. "We're in, wouldn't miss it for the world," from David's Aunt Carol. 3 hours is nothing for that sweet girl's smile. Count the 4 of us in, from his cousin Mark. "We'll be there, I'll make my famous 7-layer dip," from his Uncle Steve. Message after message poured in, each one a resounding yes. There was no hesitation, no talk of being busy. They were rearranging their schedules, carpooling, and planning their trip with an enthusiasm that brought tears to my eyes. They understood the subtext of my invitation. They knew this was more than just a party. It was a statement. They were showing up not just for Chloe, but for us. The plan was no longer about a small backyard gathering. It was about creating a full-blown family festival. We decided to go all out. We rented a bigger bouncy castle, ordered more food from a local caterer, and bought 3 times as many decorations. David's cousin, who played in a local band, offered to come and play some kid-friendly songs on his acoustic guitar. His aunt offered to organize a series of elaborate party games. It was snowballing into something bigger and more beautiful than I could have ever imagined. This wasn't just a better party, it was a better family. It was a conscious choice to invest my energy in the people who gave it back in spades, instead of pouring it into the black hole of my mother and sister's indifference. The pain of their rejection was still there, a dull ache beneath the surface, but it was being overshadowed by a profound sense of gratitude and love. They thought they were just skipping a toddler's birthday party. They had no idea they were missing the moment I stopped waiting for them and started building my own definition of family. They had received their invitation to the wedding, the event they deemed more worthy of their time. And now I had sent out mine. A better invitation to a better celebration with better people. The stage was set and the guest list was confirmed. All that was left was for the day to arrive. In the flurry of party planning and the excitement of the overwhelming response from David's family, I had managed to push the source of the conflict to the back of my mind. My mother and sis. Were a closed chapter, a problem I had decided to solve by simply writing them out of the narrative of this particular day. I didn't engage with them, I didn't reply to their social media posts, and I felt a sense of peace in that silence. But the universe, it seems, has a way of not letting things lie. The truth of their choice and the full extent of their deception was about to be revealed to me by the most unexpected source. It happened on the Wednesday before the party. I was at the grocery store, navigating the crowded aisles with a shopping cart overflowing with juice boxes, paper plates, and enough snacks to feed a small army. My phone rang, and I was surprised to see the name on the screen. Helen, my paternal grandmother. My father had passed away when I was in college, and my relationship with his parents, Helen and George, had become more distant over the years. It wasn't for any lack of love. It was simply the consequence of geography and life getting in the way. They lived several states away and, in their 80s, didn't travel much anymore. We exchanged Christmas cards and the occasional phone call. But my mother, for reasons I never fully understood, had never been particularly close to her in-laws and hadn't encouraged a strong connection after my father was gone. "Lisa, dear, how are you?" Her voice was frail but warm, a comforting sound from my childhood. "Grandma Helen, I'm good, just doing some shopping. How are you and Grandpa George?" "Oh, we're the same as always, old and creaky," she chuckled. "Listen, I know this is out of the blue, but I was just talking to your mother." My stomach tightened. "Oh," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral as I steered my cart into the empty international foods aisle. "Yes, she called to chat," Helen continued, oblivious to my sudden tension. "And she mentioned that you're having a birthday party for little Chloe this weekend. She said she and Megan were so terribly sorry to miss it, but that you had insisted on having it on the same day as Sarah's wedding, and you wouldn't be flexible on the date." I stopped walking. The can of olives I was about to put in my cart slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. I stared at it, my mind struggling to process her words. She said I insisted on the date." "Well, yes, dear. She said she had asked you if you could possibly move the party to Sunday so they could attend both, but you were quite firm about it being on Saturday. She said you got a special deal on the bouncy castle that was only good for that day." The lie was so audacious, so completely fabricated that for a moment I was speechless. A special deal on the bouncy castle? I had never spoken to my mother about the date. I had announced it, and she had shut it down. There was no conversation, no request to change it, no negotiation. She had invented an entire scenario to paint me as the unreasonable one, the inflexible daughter who had put her in an impossible position. "Grandma," I said, my voice trembling slightly with a mixture of shock and fury. "That's not true. None of that is true." "Oh," Helen sounded confused. But Sandra seemed so upset about it. She said she felt just awful, being forced to choose between her granddaughter and her niece. "She was never forced to choose," I said, the words coming out in a rush. "I invited her," she said, "We're busy, don't expect us." That was it. That was the entire conversation. She never asked me to move the date. I would have. Of course, I would have moved it to Sunday if she had asked. Why wouldn't I? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of a clock ticking in her quiet house. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, laced with a dawning understanding and a note of sternness I hadn't heard in years. "I see," she said slowly. "Lisa, I want you to tell me exactly what was said, word for word if you can remember." So I told her. I read her the exact text from my mother and sister. I told her about seeing Megan's social media post with the Family First hashtag. I told her how they had made me feel, how they had made it seem like Chloe was an afterthought. The whole story came pouring out of me, right there in the middle of the grocery store aisle. It was a raw, unfiltered confession of years of accumulated hurt. When I finished, Helen was quiet for another moment. "That girl," she finally said, and I knew she meant my mother, not Megan. She always did have a talent for rewriting history to suit her own narrative, and to use that precious little girl as a pawn in her games, it's shameful. She let out a heavy sigh. "Lisa, your grandfather and I were not as spry as we used to be. A long flight is difficult for us now, but being there for family, for a great-grandchild's birthday, that is not something you dismiss. That is not an inconvenience. That is a privilege." Tears pricked my eyes, to be seen to be. Validated by someone who had been fed a completely different story, was an incredible relief. "Your mother and your sister made their choice," Helen continued, her voice firm. "They chose a party where they could be seen, a social event. They didn't choose family. You and that little girl are your father's legacy. You are our family. And we will not have you thinking for 1 second that you are anything less than a top priority." Her words were a gift. They were the truth I had needed to hear, a confirmation that I wasn't being overly sensitive or unreasonable. I was being lied about by my own mother to cover up her selfish choice. "Thank you, Grandma," I whispered, wiping a tear from my cheek. "That means more than you know." "You have a wonderful party for that sweet girl," she said. "And you send us lots of pictures. We'll be thinking of you." After we hung up, I stood in the aisle for a few more minutes, my anger cooling and solidifying into something else: certainty. My mother hadn't just declined an invitation. She had actively, maliciously, tried to damage my reputation within our own family. She had lied to make herself the victim and me the villain. She wasn't just thoughtless, she was manipulative. Any lingering doubt I had about my decision to cut them out of the day, to create a new celebration without them, vanished. This party was no longer just about showing Chloe a good time. It was about standing up to a lifetime of casual cruelty and calculated deception. The truth was out, and it had set me free. The Saturday of the party dawned bright and impossibly sunny, as if the universe itself was on our side. The air was warm, with a gentle breeze that rustled the leaves in the trees of our backyard. By 10 in the morning, our quiet suburban home had been transformed into a bustling hub of activity. David was expertly directing the setup of the giant, colorful bouncy castle on the lawn, while his cousins, Mark and Tom, were setting up a series of tables and chairs under the shade of our large oak tree. His Aunt Carol arrived early, just as she had promised, with a tray of her legendary 7-layer dip and an infectious, booming laugh that immediately filled the house with energy. People started arriving around 12:30 p.m., a steady stream of cars pulling up to our curb. David's family, my chosen family for the day, descended upon our home with an outpouring of warmth and love that was almost overwhelming. They came bearing gifts wrapped in bright, cheerful paper, but more importantly, they came with hugs, smiles, and in genuine excitement to celebrate our daughter. They fussed over Chloe, telling her how big she was getting and how beautiful she looked in her little pink birthday dress. Chloe, who could be shy around new people, basked in the attention, her initial timidity melting away as she proudly showed off her new toys to anyone who would watch. The backyard, which had seemed so large and empty just a few hours earlier, was now teeming with life. There were nearly 40 people, a mix of adults, teenagers, and a handful of toddlers who immediately gravitated towards the bouncy castle. The air was filled with the sound of laughter, the cheerful strumming of David's cousin's guitar, and the happy squeals of children. It was a chaotic, beautiful symphony of joy. Eleanor and Richard, David's parents, were in their element. Richard, a man of few words but deep affection, sat in a lawn chair with a contented smile, watching his family come together. Eleanor was a whirlwind of grandmotherly energy, helping to serve food, cooing over the babies, and making sure everyone felt welcome. At one point, I saw her engaged in a deep conversation with one of the younger cousins, her head nodding with sincere interest. She was the matriarch I had always craved, a woman who nurtured and connected her family with effortless grace. I spent most of my time floating between conversations, my heart so full it felt like it might burst. I watched as David's Uncle Steve, a big, burly man, got down on his hands and knees to play with the toddlers, his deep voice making silly cartoon noises that sent them into fits of giggles. I saw a group of the teenage cousins teaching Chloe how to blow bubbles, their faces patient and kind as they showed her how to hold the wand. This was what family was supposed to feel like. It wasn't about obligation or appearances. It was about showing up, being present, and sharing in each other's happiness. Around 2:30 p.m., it was time for the cake. David and I carried it out from the kitchen, a magnificent princess castle with pink turrets and sparkling, edible glitter. Everyone gathered around the main table, and the whole yard erupted into a loud, slightly off-key rendition of Happy Birthday. I held Chloe in my arms, her little face illuminated by the glow of the 3 candles. She looked around at the sea of smiling faces, all focused on her, and her expression was one of pure, unadulterated delight. As she blew out the candles with a determined little puff, a huge cheer went up from the crowd. In that moment, surrounded by this incredible, loving group of people, I felt a profound sense of peace. My mother and sister weren't here. They had chosen to be somewhere else. And it didn't matter. Not at all. As I was cutting the cake, Eleanor came and stood beside me. She put a gentle hand on my arm. "Look at this, Lisa," she said softly, gesturing to the happy chaos around us. "Look at all this love for your little girl. This is what matters. This is real." I felt a lump form in my throat, and I nodded, unable to speak. She was right. This was real. The carefully curated photos my sister posted on social media were a performance of family. The polite, distant phone calls with my mother were a hollow imitation of connection. This, right here, was the real thing. It was messy, it was loud, and it was beautiful. We spent the rest of the afternoon opening presents. Chloe was showered with thoughtful gifts, books, puzzles, a tiny tricycle, each one given with a personal touch. But the real gift was the one being given to me, the undeniable, tangible proof that my little family was cherished. We were not an afterthought. We were a priority. We were loved. As the party began to wind down around 4 p.m., and guests started to say their goodbyes, they all made a point of coming to find me and David. "Thank you for including us," David's Aunt Carol said, giving me a tight hug. "This was so special. We were honored to be here." "Any time you need us, you call," his Uncle Steve added, clapping David on the back. "We're family." One by one, they left, leaving our house in a state of happy disarray. As the last car pulled away, I stood on the front porch with David, holding a sleepy, cake-smeared Chloe in my arms. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the lawn. The day had been perfect, more than perfect. It had been healing. My mother and sister hadn't just been absent, they had been replaced. Their absence had created a space that was filled with something far better, far more authentic. They thought they were missing a small, insignificant party for a 3-year-old. They had no idea they had missed this, and I was about to make sure they knew exactly what this was. The plan had been brewing in my mind all day, a quiet undercurrent to the joyful noise of the party. It wasn't born of spite, exactly, but of a deep, unshakable need to correct the narrative. My mother had painted me as the villain in her story to Grandma Helen. My sister had dismissed my daughter's feelings as irrelevant. They had operated under the assumption that their rejection would happen in a vacuum, that I would quietly accept their decision and move on. They had underestimated me. They had underestimated the love that surrounded me. Now, it was time to show them the world they had chosen to exclude themselves from. After Chloe was sound asleep in her bed, exhausted and happy, David and I sat down at the dining room table. Our phones were filled with photos and videos from the day. There were hundreds of them, each one a snapshot of pure joy. We had pictures of Chloe's face lighting up as she saw the bouncy castle, videos of her dancing to the music, and candid shots of her being passed around and cuddled by a dozen different relatives. We weren't professional photographers, but the emotions captured in those images were incredibly powerful. The love was palpable. I began to carefully select the best ones, not just the photos that were technically good, but the ones that told a story. I chose a photo of Grandpa Richard, a man known for his stoicism, beaming with pride as he pushed Chloe on a swing. I chose one of a leaner holding Chloe's hand, both of them looking at the birthday cake with identical expressions of wonder. I chose a wide shot of the entire backyard, packed with people, all of them laughing and talking, a vibrant tapestry of family connection. And I chose a close-up of Chloe, her face smeared with chocolate frosting, her eyes sparkling with a happiness so profound it was almost tangible. I spent over an hour curating the collection, creating a digital album that documented the day from start to finish. It wasn't just a random assortment of pictures, it was a carefully constructed narrative. The story it told was one of overwhelming love, of a family united in celebration, of a little girl who was the absolute center of her universe. Once the album was ready, I uploaded it to my social media profile. I made sure the privacy settings were set to public. I knew my sister, with her obsession for all things online, would see it. I also knew that several of my mother's friends followed me, and that word would get back to her. But I wasn't content to just let them stumble upon it. I wanted to make sure they saw it directly. I opened my messaging app and started a new group chat. Just me, my Mo. There and Megan. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. I attached the entire photo album to the message. I didn't add any angry text, no accusations, no "I told you so." I chose my words with deliberate, surgical precision. My message was simple, polite, and utterly devastating in its implications. "Hi both," I typed. "Just wanted to share some photos from Chloe's birthday party today. We had a wonderful time celebrating with our family." The final word was the key. Our family. Not David's family. Our family. The family that had shown up. The family that had made my daughter feel like the most important person in the world. I hit send just before 8 p.m., knowing they would likely be home from the wedding by now, scrolling through their phones, basking in the afterglow of their glamorous day. Then, for good measure, I chose the single most powerful photo of the day, the wide shot of our packed backyard, a sea of happy, loving faces, and I made it my profile picture on all my social media accounts. There would be no escaping it. David came and stood behind me, reading the message I had sent. He squeezed my shoulder. "Perfect," he said quietly. "Absolutely perfect." We didn't have to wait long. Less than 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was Megan. "Who are all those people?" Her text was so predictable, a mixture of confusion and suspicion. She didn't ask if we had a nice time. She didn't comment on how happy Chloe looked. Her immediate reaction was one of territorial confusion. Who were these people filling the space that was supposed to be hers? I took a deep breath and typed my reply. David's family, his aunts, uncles, cousins, they were all so happy to be there for Chloe. Another 10 minutes of silence. Then, a second message from Megan, this one dripping with a new, unfamiliar tone. It sounded defensive, almost panicked. "You never told us you were inviting all of them." "It was a last-minute decision," I typed back, the statement technically true, though I omitted the reason why. "We decided we wanted Chloe to have a big family celebration." The next message was from my mother. It was the first time she had initiated a conversation with me since her blunt, "We're busy" text. Her message was a single, telling question. "Did Helen and George see these pictures?" And there it was, the real fear. It wasn't that they had missed a party. It was that their carefully crafted narrative had been shattered. The story she had told my grandmother, the one where I was the unreasonable daughter forcing her to make an impossible choice, was now directly contradicted by a mountain of photographic evidence. The photos showed a party they could have easily attended for an hour or two. The photos showed a daughter who was not isolated and stubborn, but surrounded by a loving, extensive family network. The photos showed, in vivid color, exactly what they had chosen to miss. And they showed that we hadn't just survived without them, we had thrived. I let her question hang in the air for a long time. I didn't need to answer it. The silence was my response. The photos had done their job. They weren't just pictures, they were a mirror, reflecting back the truth of their choices, and I had a feeling they didn't like what they saw. The day after the party was quiet. The house was clean, the leftover cake was stored in the fridge, and Chloe was happily playing with her new tricycle in the driveway. The contrast to the previous day's joyful chaos was stark, but it was a peaceful silence, filled with the warm, lingering glow of happy memories. The photo album I had posted online had become a minor sensation among my friends and David's family, with comments pouring in about what a beautiful party it was and how happy Chloe looked. But for my mother and sister, there was nothing but a profound and telling silence. They didn't like the album. They didn't comment. The group chat I had sent the photos to remained unread after their initial, panicked questions. I knew the photos had hit their mark. I had held up a mirror, and they were now forced to confront the reflection of their own choices. They had opted for the wedding, the event with more social cachet, the one that would look better on Megan's blog. They had assumed that Chloe's party would be a small, sad little affair without them, reinforcing their own importance. The reality? A huge, joyous celebration with a different, more enthusiastic branch of the family, had completely upended their narrative. We hadn't needed them. In fact, their absence had been the catalyst for something far better. The first crack in their silence came on Monday evening. My phone rang, and I saw my mother's name on the screen. For a moment, I considered answering. A part of me, the part that had been conditioned since childhood to seek her approval, wanted to hear what she had to say. I imagined she would have some excuse, some twisted justification for her behavior. Perhaps she would try to gaslight me, to claim I was overreacting. Or maybe, just maybe, she would apologize. But as the phone continued to ring, I realized I didn't want to hear any of it. What could she possibly say that would change anything? An apology now, after being caught in a lie and confronted with the evidence of our happiness, would feel hollow and self-serving. It wouldn't be for me. It would be for her, to assuage her own guilt and repair her own image. I had spent a lifetime listening to her excuses and accepting her non-apologies. I was done. I let the call go to voicemail. A few minutes later, a text message appeared. "Lisa, we need to talk, call me." "We need to talk" was my mother's classic opening line for a lecture, not a conversation. It was a summons, not a request. It was about her needs, not mine. I looked at the message, a wave of calm certainty washing over me. I had nothing to say to her. The photos had said it all. I showed the text to David. He read it and nodded slowly. "What are you going to do?" "Nothing," I said, and the word felt powerful, liberating. "I'm going to do nothing." Over the next few days, the attempts at contact became more frequent and more desperate. Megan sent me a long, rambling message about how I had put them in a difficult position and how it was unfair of me to flaunt David's family like that. She accused me of trying to make them look bad. I read her message, a sad smile on my face. She still didn't get it. She thought my actions were a performance for her benefit. She couldn't comprehend that my actions were about my own happiness, about protecting my own peace and my daughter's joy. I didn't reply. My mother called again, twice on Tuesday and once on Wednesday morning. Each time I watched the screen, my finger hovering over the decline button, and each time I let it ring until it fell silent. She left another voicemail, her tone more strained this time. "Lisa, this is ridiculous. You're acting like a child. Pick up the phone." Her words, meant to sting, had lost their power. She was accusing me of being childish while simultaneously refusing to acknowledge the childishness of her own behavior, lying, prioritizing social events over family, and dismissing her own granddaughter. The irony was not lost on me. The final, most telling communication came on Friday, nearly a week after the party. It was a text from my mother, and it was clear she had spoken to Grandma Helen again. "I heard from your grandmother that you think I lied to her. It was a misunderstanding. You know how she gets things confused these days. I was just trying to keep the peace. I'm sorry if you were offended, but this whole situation has been blown way out of proportion." It was the classic non-apology. "I'm sorry if you were offended." The blame was shifted back to me, to my reaction. And the casual, cruel swipe at my elderly grandmother's cognitive abilities was the final nail in the coffin. She wasn't just selfish and manipulative, she was willing to throw anyone under the bus to save face. I finally understood. This was who she was. This was who they were. No amount of hoping or wishing on my part would ever change that fundamental truth. I could spend the rest of my life fighting for a place at their table, or I could build my own table and fill it with people who were happy to be there. I had spent one perfect Saturday doing just that, and it had changed everything. I typed out my last response to them. It was short, clear, and left no room for negotiation. "I'm not interested in discussing this further. I'm focusing on the people who prioritize me and my daughter. We will be in touch when we are ready." It wasn't a dramatic severing of ties, but it was a boundary. A firm, clear line drawn in the sand. It was a declaration of my independence from their drama, their expectations, and their conditional love. For the first time in my life, I was the one in control. I was the one setting the terms. The calls and texts stopped after that. The silence that followed was not the heavy, painful silence of the past. It was a light, peaceful silence, filled with the promise of a future where my energy would be invested in relationships that were reciprocal, in a family that was chosen, and in a love that was freely and joyfully given, no strings attached. The picture of our packed backyard was still my profile picture. A quiet, constant reminder of the day I stopped asking for a seat at their table and built my own beautiful banquet.